The slap cracked through the diner like a gunshot. The waitress stumbled backward. Coffee painted the linoleum in dark arcs. The room held its breath. In a shadowed booth sat a man in tailored black, a Belgian Malinois motionless as stone beneath the table. No flinch, no shift, not even a blink. The billionaire in the custom suit had grown comfortable in this town, comfortable with silence, comfortable with control, comfortable watching people turn away. That comfort was a mistake. The boundaries he'd just crossed belonged to a man who built an empire in the shadows, a man who knows the difference between making noise and making someone disappear. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If this story grips you, hit subscribe. The black sedan rolled into the gravel lot just as dawn broke over the highway. Vincent Walker stepped out, unfolding his frame with the deliberate care of a man who never rushed anywhere. The Belgian Malinois emerged behind him, a shadow given muscle and teeth, her ears already scanning the perimeter before her paws touched ground. The diner was the kind of place that existed in the margins, too far from the city to attract tourists, too close to the interstate to be forgotten. Vincent had passed through 100 like it, anonymous, forgettable, perfect. He pushed through the door, and the small bell above it announced his arrival with a cheerful jingle that felt obscene against the weight he carried. The morning shift was in full swing, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the griddle, the low murmur of truckers nursing coffee and hangovers in equal measure. Vincent chose a booth in the corner, the one with a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen. The Malinois settled at his feet without command, her body coiled like a loaded spring that would never fire unless he gave the word. She was a weapon, yes, but also a statement. Control, discipline, the kind of partnership that couldn't be bought, only earned. The waitress approached with a pot of coffee and a tired smile. Her name tag read Esther. Vincent noted the faded tattoos on her forearms, the slight tremor in her hands that spoke of too many double shifts and not enough sleep. She poured his coffee without asking, the gesture automatic, practiced. "Anything else, honey?" Her voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who'd learned to armor herself in kindness. "Just the coffee, black." Vincent's voice was low, textured like gravel underfoot. He met her eyes briefly, just long enough to be polite, not long enough to be memorable. She moved on, and Vincent returned to his preferred state of being, invisible. He could feel the other patrons glancing his way, the ink on his hands, the predatory stillness of the dog, the way his coat hung just so, tailored to accommodate things that shouldn't be discussed in polite company. They looked and looked away. Smart. He wrapped both hands around the ceramic mug, feeling its warmth seep into his palms. This was what he'd driven 300 miles for. Not the coffee, not the anonymity, but the illusion of normalcy. A brief window where Vincent Walker could be just another traveler, just another face passing through, not the man whose name made accountants sweat and lawyers reconsider their career choices. The Malinois shifted slightly, her attention drawn to the door. Vincent didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge the change, but his body registered it. Someone was coming, someone who moved through the world like they owned it. The bell above the door rang again, but this time the sound felt different, sharper, more deliberate. Vincent took a slow sip of his coffee and waited.
Tommy Drake didn't walk into the diner so much as he claimed it. The door swung wide, held open by a man in a dark suit and an earpiece, security trying to look casual and failing spectacularly. Drake followed, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying across the room like he was addressing a boardroom rather than a breakfast joint. "I don't care what the zoning committee says, Jenkins. I own half of them, and I'm about to own the other half." He laughed, the sound sharp and entitled. "Tell them the development moves forward, or I'll bury them in litigation until their grandkids are paying legal fees." He ended the call with a theatrical jab of his finger, then surveyed the diner with the expression of a man inspecting property he was considering bulldozing. Custom suit, Italian shoes that had no business on linoleum, a watch that cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot, new money trying desperately to look like old money and missing the mark by a mile. The truckers hunched over their meals. The cook kept his eyes on the griddle. Even the waitress, who'd just refilled someone's coffee, seemed to shrink slightly, her shoulders drawing inward. Drake made his way to a booth near the window, his security detail hovering nearby like well-dressed gargoyles. He snapped his fingers without looking up. Coffee, black, and tell whoever's cooking back there that if my eggs aren't perfect, I'll have the health inspector here by noon. Esther materialized at his table, pot in hand, her smile now a painted-on thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Drake. The usual?" Did I stutter? Coffee first. Then we'll see if your kitchen can manage not to poison me. He didn't look at her when he spoke, his attention already back on his phone, scrolling through emails with the focused intensity of a man for whom every second was billable. The door opened again. This time it was Sheriff Clayton, his uniform crisp, his badge catching the fluorescent light. He made a beeline for Drake's table, his approach that of a subject approaching a throne. "Mr. Drake?" The sheriff's voice carried the practiced deference of someone who knew where his campaign contributions came from. "Just wanted to stop by, see if everything's to your satisfaction this morning." Drake glanced up, barely. "It will be when the town council stops dragging their feet on the permits. That's what I pay you for, isn't it? To make sure things run smoothly?" "Yes, sir, we're working on it." "Work faster." Drake dismissed him with a wave, and the sheriff retreated, nodding like a kicked dog, still hoping for scraps. Vincent watched all of this from his corner booth, his coffee cooling between his palms. The Malinois' ears had flattened slightly, reading the room's tension the way only animals could. Vincent's expression didn't change. He simply observed, cataloging, filing away each interaction like evidence in a case that hadn't been tried yet. The morning light caught the edge of Drake's platinum cufflinks as he raised his hand, impatient, demanding. Esther approached with the coffee pot. Vincent's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his mug. Esther's hand trembled as she poured. It was subtle, the kind of exhaustion-induced shake that came from too many hours on aching feet, too many entitled customers, too many nights wondering how to make rent. The coffee stream wavered for just a fraction of a second. 3 drops hit the sleeve of Tommy Drake's jacket. The world seemed to pause, the way it does before lightning strikes. Drake's hand froze mid-scroll on his phone, his jaw clenched. The security detail shifted their weight, reading the change in atmospheric pressure. "You stupid!" Drake's chair scraped back as he stood, his face contorting with a rage that seemed wildly disproportionate to 3 drops of liquid on $10,000 of fabric. "Do you have any idea what this costs? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Mr. Drake, I'm so sorry. I'll get a cloth." Esther was already reaching for her apron, her voice tight with the kind of fear that came from knowing you couldn't afford to lose this job. The slap came before she finished the sentence. His palm connected with her cheek with a crack that silenced every conversation, stopped every fork midway to every mouth. Esther's head snapped to the side, her body swaying as she fought to keep her balance. The coffee pot slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of glass and dark liquid that spread across the linoleum like blood. No one moved. The cook stood frozen at the griddle, spatula suspended. The truckers stared into their plates. Sheriff Clayton, still standing near the door, looked at his shoes. The only sound was Esther's ragged breathing and the hiss of something burning on the stove that no one remembered to turn off. Drake stood over her, his hand still raised, his chest heaving with indignation. "Clean this up, and send me the dry cleaning bill for my suit. No, forget it. You couldn't afford it anyway. You're lucky I don't sue this pathetic establishment into the ground." Vincent Walker hadn't moved. His coffee sat before him, growing cold. His hands remained wrapped around the mug, steady as stone. The Malinois beside him had gone rigid, every muscle locked, waiting for the signal that controlled chaos, the word that meant action. But Vincent gave no signal. He simply watched. His eyes tracked Drake's movements with the focused attention of a sniper acquiring a target. No anger in his expression, no disgust, just a terrible, patient stillness that was somehow more frightening than rage could ever be. This was a man who had seen violence in forms Drake couldn't imagine, who had dispensed justice in ways that left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no second chances. Drake smoothed his jacket, already pulling out his phone to call his lawyer, his dry cleaner, whoever could erase this minor inconvenience from his perfect morning. He hadn't noticed the man in the corner booth. He hadn't noticed those flint-gray eyes marking him, measuring him, deciding his fate with the cold precision of a surgeon planning an incision. Not yet.
Drake's security guard leaned in, whispered something while gesturing subtly toward the corner booth. Drake's gaze followed, landing on Vincent for the first time. His eyes narrowed, taking in the tattoos, the dark clothing, the dog that looked more military than pet. A slow smile spread across Drake's face, the kind of smile that preceded bad decisions. "You." Drake's voice cut through the silence, sharp and accusatory. "You got a problem? You've been staring at me since I walked in." Vincent didn't respond. He lifted his coffee mug, took a deliberate sip, his eyes never leaving Drake's face. The lack of reaction seemed to inflame something in the billionaire. "I asked you a question." Drake took 3 steps toward Vincent's booth, his security detail moving with him like satellites orbiting a dying star. "You think you're tough, sitting there with your prison tattoos and your attack dog, thinking you scare people?" The diner had gone from silent to suffocating. Every person present recognized they were watching a collision between 2 different kinds of power, even if only one of the men seemed aware of it. Vincent set down his mug with exaggerated care. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You should sit down and finish your breakfast." "Don't tell me what to do." Drake's face flushed red. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this whole town. I could buy you. What are you, some biker trash passing through, some ex-con looking for trouble?" "I'm someone having coffee," Vincent said, his tone unchanged, reasonable, almost bored. Drake laughed, the sound ugly and performative. He turned to address the room at large. "This is what's wrong with America. Criminals think they can stare down honest businessmen, think they can intimidate people who actually contribute to society." He spun back to Vincent. "I've got the sheriff right there. Say the word, Clayton, and you can haul this thug out for harassment, can't you?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably by the door, caught between 2 forces he couldn't quite measure. Vincent's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, but calculation, assessment, the way a chess master might look at an opponent who just sacrificed their queen without realizing it. "Mr. Drake," Esther's voice came from behind the counter, small and shaking. She gathered the broken glass, her cheek already darkening where his hand had landed. "Please, there's no trouble here. I'll get you fresh coffee on the house." "I'm not talking to you," Drake snapped, not even looking at her. His attention remained fixed on Vincent, feeding off the confrontation like fuel. "I'm talking to this piece of—" "Careful." The single word from Vincent carried more weight than Drake's entire monologue. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact, a boundary drawn in invisible ink that only certain people knew how to read. Drake's security guard touched his elbow, whispered something urgent. Drake shook him off. "I don't care who he thinks he is. This is my town." Vincent smiled then. It didn't reach his eyes.
Drake finally retreated to his booth, still muttering about lowlifes and vagrant laws, his security detail flanking him like he'd just survived an assassination attempt, rather than a one-sided confrontation with a man who'd said perhaps a dozen words. The billionaire attacked his eggs with aggressive precision, his phone once again commanding his attention, the incident with Esther already filed away under peasant problems handled. Vincent sat motionless for another 5 minutes. The diner slowly exhaled, conversations resuming in hushed tones, forks scraping against plates, the cook finally remembering to flip the hash browns that had been perilously close to charcoal. The Malinois relaxed incrementally, her breathing settling back into the steady rhythm of a soldier standing down from high alert. Esther moved through her section with mechanical efficiency, her movements careful, controlled. She refilled coffee for the truckers, delivered plates of toast and bacon, smiled at the appropriate moments. But Vincent noticed the way she avoided Drake's side of the room, how she developed a sudden need to organize the condiment station that happened to keep the counter between her and the man who'd struck her. Vincent reached into his jacket. The security guard's hand twitched toward his own concealed weapon, but Vincent's movement was slow, deliberate, non-threatening. He withdrew a leather wallet, extracted 2 things, a crisp $100 bill and a small piece of paper folded once. He placed both on the table beneath his empty coffee mug. Then he stood, his movements economical, the kind of physical efficiency that came from a lifetime of knowing exactly how much force was needed for any given situation. The Malinois rose with him, shaking once, her tags jingling softly. Vincent pulled on his coat, adjusted a collar with the same careful attention he gave everything. He walked toward the counter where Esther was wiping down the coffee station, her back to the room. He didn't speak. He simply caught her eye, held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to communicate intent, not long enough to draw unwanted attention, and tilted his head almost imperceptibly toward the booth he'd just vacated. Then he was moving toward the door, the dog at his heel, his presence already receding like a shadow when the sun shifts. "Wait," Esther called after him, her voice uncertain. "Your change." But the door had already closed behind him, the bell chiming his departure with the same cheerful obliviousness it had announced his arrival. Esther stood holding her cleaning cloth, confusion creasing her features. After a moment she moved to clear Vincent's table. She found the $100 bill first, more than enough to cover a single cup of coffee. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. That's when she saw the paper underneath. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the contents once, then twice, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something harder, something that looked like understanding crystallizing into purpose. The paper contained a single account number, a bank name in the Cayman Islands, and a dollar amount with so many zeros it took her a moment to count them properly. At the bottom, in precise handwriting, "Everything has a price. He's about to pay his." The lawsuit arrived 3 days later, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed Esther the envelope. Tommy Drake versus Esther Chen and Maple Grove Diner, claiming defamation, emotional distress, and loss of reputation stemming from false allegations of assault. The amount sought? $2 million. More money than Esther would earn in 10 lifetimes of pouring coffee. She sat in her studio apartment that night, the legal documents spread across her second-hand table, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read the words. Drake was going to bury her. He had the lawyers, the money, the connections. She had student loan debt and a 10-year-old Honda with a check engine light that had been on since the Obama administration. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Don't sign anything." The voice was low, familiar in a way that made her spine straighten. "A lawyer named Sarah Mitchell will contact you tomorrow morning. She's already been retained. Everything's handled." "Who is this?" The line went dead. Sarah Mitchell called at 8 a.m. sharp. She was a partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the state, the kind of lawyer who charged 4 figures per hour and made district attorneys nervous. She explained in crisp, professional tones that Esther's legal representation was being provided pro bono as part of the firm's community justice initiative. When Esther asked why, Mitchell simply said, "Let's just say you have an interested benefactor who values accountability."
That same week, 3 members of Drake's board of directors received unexpected visits from federal auditors. Pure coincidence, of course, the kind of coincidence that revealed discrepancies in their tax filings, questionable stock transactions, and connections to shell corporations that couldn't quite explain their revenue streams. Drake's chief financial officer resigned abruptly, citing family health concerns, but the Whisper Network told a different story, something about photographs of him leaving a hotel with someone who decidedly wasn't his wife, photographs that had somehow found their way to both his spouse and his church's board of elders. The head of Drake's security detail, the same man who'd stood silent while his employer struck a waitress, found himself under investigation for weapons trafficking. Anonymous tips had led authorities to discover he'd been selling decommissioned police firearms on the black market. His arrest made the local news. One by one, the pillars supporting Drake's empire developed sudden structural problems. His primary investor pulled funding after his daughter, a college sophomore studying social justice, showed him a viral video of a billionaire slapping a working woman in a diner. Someone had been recording on their phone. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. 20 million views in 48 hours. Drake's publicist quit via email, offering no explanation beyond ethical differences. His lawyer requested a continuance on the lawsuit against Esther, then another, then quietly suggested they might want to reconsider the whole endeavor. Through it all, Esther never saw the man from the corner booth again, but she felt his presence in every unexpected turn, every piece of Drake's world that quietly came apart like a sweater with one pulled thread. Drake noticed the changes gradually, then all at once. First, it was Marcus, his head of security, gone, arrested, awaiting trial. The replacement came highly recommended, arrived with impeccable credentials from a firm that specialized in executive protection. Clean-cut, professional, former military. Drake barely glanced at him during the interview. "Just keep the riffraff away from me," he'd said, already scrolling through his phone. The new guard's name was Coleman. He was efficient, silent, always 3 steps behind Drake like a well-trained shadow. Exactly what Drake wanted. Then Jensen, his driver of 5 years, gave 2 weeks' notice, something about his mother in Phoenix needing care. The replacement was prompt, drove smoothly, kept the town car immaculate. Drake never bothered learning his name. His personal assistant quit next, then the weekend security team, then the guards who monitored his estate's perimeter. One by one, the familiar faces disappeared, replaced by new ones, always professional, always capable, always strangers. Drake told himself it was coincidence, high turnover in the security industry. People were unreliable. He'd find better people, like he always did. It wasn't until the 3rd week that the fear started. He was in his home office when he noticed Coleman standing in the doorway, not moving, just watching. "What?" Drake snapped. "Nothing, sir, just checking the perimeter." But Coleman's eyes held something Drake couldn't quite identify, not deference, something colder. That night, Drake couldn't sleep. He found himself listening to the sounds of his own house, the footsteps of guards making their rounds, the opening and closing of doors, voices in the hallway speaking in tones too low to make out words. His own security team, and yet he felt like a prisoner in his glass and marble fortress. He called the security firm the next morning, demanded to speak to the owner. The conversation was brief, professional, and entirely unhelpful. "All our personnel are thoroughly vetted, Mr. Drake. Is there a specific concern?" What could he say? That his guards looked at him like they were waiting for something? That he'd woken at 3 a.m. to find 2 of them standing in his hallway, conversing in whispers that stopped the moment they saw him? He tried to fire Coleman that afternoon. "You're done. Pack your things." Coleman smiled. It was a terrible smile. "I'm afraid my contract is with the estate management company, sir. You'd need to go through them." "I own the estate management company." "Do you?" Coleman tilted his head. "I'd check your corporate filings, Mr. Drake. I think you'll find some recent changes." Drake's hands started shaking. He locked himself in his panic room, the one with the reinforced door and independent security system, and pulled up his accounts on his laptop. The estate management company had been sold 3 weeks ago to a holding company he'd never heard of, buried in paperwork he apparently signed but didn't remember signing. He was in a house full of guards he didn't hire, working for a company he didn't own, and for the first time in his life, Tommy Drake understood what it meant to be powerless. Outside the panic room door, he heard footsteps, patient, unhurried, waiting. They came at dawn, because that's when they always came. Drake was in his panic room when he heard the battering ram hit his front door. He'd been there for 18 hours, surviving on bottled water and granola bars, watching his security cameras with growing paranoia. Now those same cameras showed him a nightmare unfolding in high definition. Federal agents in tactical gear pouring through his entrance like a black-clad flood, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands that echoed through marble hallways designed to showcase wealth, not contain chaos. Federal agents, search warrant, show yourself with your hands visible. Coleman appeared on the camera feed, hands raised, speaking calmly to the lead agent. They didn't cuff him, they barely looked at him. He stepped aside and gestured toward the panic room like a doorman directing guests to the coat check. Drake's phone had died hours ago. His laptop showed 19 news alerts, all with his name in the headline. He clicked the first one with trembling fingers. Tech billionaire Tommy Drake under federal investigation for tax evasion, money laundering. The article cited anonymous tips from multiple sources, bank records, offshore accounts, shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, payoffs to local officials. A digital trail so comprehensive it read like someone had turned his entire financial life inside out and handed it to prosecutors wrapped in a bow. The second article was worse. Diner assault video goes viral. Drake faces additional civil rights charges. There was Esther's face, her cheek still red from the impact, and there, in crystal clarity, was his hand making contact. The footage had been enhanced, cleaned up, submitted as evidence, not just to the court of public opinion, but to actual courts, federal courts. Someone knocked on the panic room door. Polite, professional. Mr. Drake, this is Special Agent Rebecca Nakamura with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest and a warrant to search these premises. You need to open this door now or we will breach it. You have 60 seconds to comply. Drake looked at the camera feeds. Agents were already in his bedroom, his office, his wine cellar. They were photographing everything, bagging evidence, dismantling the life he'd built dollar by dollar, acquisition by acquisition, intimidation by intimidation. On one camera, he saw an agent examining a painting he'd purchased for $3 million. On another, they were opening his safe. How did they know the combination? And removing documents he'd been assured were untraceable. On a third camera, in the corner of the frame, he saw a black sedan parked at the end of his driveway. A man leaned against it, too far away to identify clearly, but Drake knew. He knew the way you know things in nightmares, with absolute certainty that defies logic. A Belgian Malinois sat beside the man, patient as death. 30 seconds, Mr. Drake. He opened the door. The agents swarmed him immediately, professional and efficient, reading him rights he could barely hear over the roaring in his ears. They cuffed him gently. They always did when cameras might be watching, and led him through his own house like a stranger being evicted. As they guided him outside, he searched for the black sedan. It was already gone.
6 months later, Vincent's sedan pulled into the same gravel lot, the tires crunching over stones that hadn't changed, in a world that had. The diner looked different in subtle ways, a fresh coat of paint, new signage that read Esther's Place in clean, confident letters, flowers and window boxes that suggested someone now had time to care about such things. The Malinois stepped out with him, older by half a year but no less alert, her ears tracking the morning sounds of a highway waking up. Vincent paused before the door, his hand resting on the handle for just a moment.
then pushed through. The bell chimed its familiar greeting. The interior had been updated too. New booths, refinished countertops, lighting that was warmer, less institutional. But the smell was the same. Coffee and griddle grease, and the promise of breakfast made by people who understood that sometimes food was the only comfort available. A few customers dotted the space, locals mostly, their conversation easy and unguarded. Vincent chose the same corner booth, muscle memory, perhaps, or respect for the symmetry of endings. Esther emerged from the kitchen, and he almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was different, shorter. She moved with a confidence that hadn't been there before, the kind that came from owning your space rather than just occupying it. She saw him immediately, and for a fraction of a second her step faltered. Then she grabbed a coffee pot and walked over, her expression unreadable. She poured without asking, the stream steady and sure, no tremor in her hands now. She set the pot down and slid into the booth across from him, something she never would have dared 6 months ago with any customer. "I wondered if you'd come back," she said quietly. Vincent wrapped his hands around the mug, the gesture as familiar as breathing. "Just passing through." "You're always passing through?" It wasn't a question. She studied his face, and he let her, understanding that she'd earned the right to look directly at the monster under the bed and see it for what it was. "The lawyer said you paid her firm a retainer that could have bought this place twice over." "Sarah's expensive," Vincent acknowledged. "The news said Drake took a plea deal. 20 years, maybe 15 with good behavior. They seized everything, the houses, the cars, the offshore accounts." She paused. "That account number you left me. The prosecutor said it was the key to everything, cracked the whole case open." Vincent sipped his coffee, said nothing. "They never found out who gave me that paper," Esther continued. "I told them I found it in the diner. Anonymous tip, they called it. They stopped asking after a while." "Smart." She leaned back, her eyes never leaving his. "I used to wonder what kind of person could do what you did. Take apart a man's entire life without ever raising your voice, without ever even being there. And now? Now I think maybe the world needs people like you. Not many, but some." She stood, smoothed her apron, new, unstained, worn by choice rather than necessity. "Coffee's on the house, always will be." Vincent nodded once, a small gesture but weighted with everything that couldn't be said in a public space. Acknowledgement, respect, the recognition that they'd both played their parts in a story that would never make the official record. Esther returned to her kitchen, and Vincent sat alone with his coffee, watching the morning unfold through clean windows. The Malinois rested her head on his knee. After a while, he stood, placed $200 bills on the table, and walked toward the door. The bell chimed his departure. By the time Esther came to clear the table, the black sedan was already a speck on the horizon, dissolving into the heat shimmer of another anonymous highway, carrying its ghost toward the next town, the next injustice, the next reckoning that would come like thunder, but leave no fingerprints. She pocketed the money and smiled. Some debts, she understood now, could never be fully repaid, but they could be honored. And that was enough.
If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another tale of justice served cold and power meeting its match. Drop a like if you believe some debts can only be settled in the shadows. Share this with someone who needs to remember that true power doesn't shout, it simply acts. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Vincent's position? The next story is already waiting. Subscribe now.